Well, thank you, Dimitri. Let me get the share going here. This is the first time I have shared in a Zoom meeting, been participated in many of them. And yeah, Dimitri, I first recognized Dimitri only on the air, not on social media or anything, when I was up in the Niagara Falls area. Activating for Canadian National Parks last year, and I was thinking, who is this guy? I don't know him. He's not on Facebook, which is fine. And so that's how I first started recognizing Dimitri's call sign. So thank you, Dimitri, for inviting me here today to the Long Island CW Club, even though I pointed out to you, do you sure you want me? Because I don't know Morse code. So I hope you'll forgive me for that. This talk is about urban portable operations. And I'm also trying to sell you guys on the idea of activating for POTA, especially in New York City, but that'll come a little later. First, a little about me. I was a late bloomer for a lot of things, including ham radio. As a teenager, I started studying for it, but a lack of money, then college, career, and family kept me away from doing anything with the hobby. And finally, I got licensed in 2013 after waiting 40 years to do so. And that was prompted when a coworker of mine started playing with SDRs. And I was excited about the idea of computers combined with radio, since my entire career has been in computers in one way or another. Since 2014, I've been pretty busy, winning a Worked All States DXCC from home. I had a couple of VH Rover Division wins. POTA has been very active, especially since 2017, activating 644, performing 644 activations, and as Dimitri said, from 335 unique parks, with about 27,000 QSOs in 19 states and Canadian provinces. And I've won a mobile QSO party contest in 4 states so far. I haven't got Virginia yet, but I'm working on that. When I first started activating, when I first started getting involved with ham radio, I should say, and just reading about it, what are the different facets of ham radio, I was immediately fascinated by the idea of roving. It looked like an exciting and challenging facet of ham radio. And I read about all the different ways you can get involved, from QSO parties, activating different counties, VHF contests, activating different Maidenhead grids, in my case on 6 meters through 70 centimeters. And then the parks program, which I'll talk the most about in this presentation, starting with the National Parks on the Air from the ARL in 2016, Canadian version of National Parks on the Air in 2019, last year, and POTA has existed since 2017, Parks on the Air, which is an ongoing program rather than a single year program. To do these activations, I used the family minivan for the first 3 years. But because it's a family minivan, I had to build it and then deconstruct it, then build it again, deconstruct it. And that's a pain in the neck. I'm glad I had it, and I'm glad my wife had the patience with me to do that, but that was a pain in the neck. So a few months before my retirement, I bought a dedicated TV van, and that's the kind if you haven't seen in real life, I'm sure you've seen it in movies and TV shows where they send up a mast in order to communicate with microwave links or satellites to do live television production. Here's a couple pictures of that minivan rover in action. On the left is the VHF version. You can see 4 antennas for the 4 bands from 6 meters to 70 centimeters on a rotator, and that is all mounted on a trailer hitch that you can't see in the bottom of the picture. But I made a lot of contacts with this configuration and had a lot of fun in VHF contests. This interesting looking spiky thing is a elevated ground plane antenna for HF. I first used this when I went out to activate and won the Pennsylvania QSO party my first year out with this, but it takes some time to build. So since then, I switched over to a Tar Heel 200 screwdriver antenna and have been very successful with that. And it has seen a lot of rough service and a lot of QSO. So I'm a big fan of Tar Heel. I recently replaced it because I had an accident. Otherwise, that thing, I'm sure, would have kept going and going. And I mentioned the TV van that replaced the minivan from my mobile station. And here's just a couple of pictures of the TV van in action in 2019 for Canadian National Parks on the Air. I rove through the maritime provinces of Canada, and to save about 10 hours of driving, I took a couple ferry trips. So this is the van on its first ferry ride across from Prince Edward Island to Nova Scotia. And I must say, I grew up in New England, and I'm used to ferries in New England carrying about 6 cars at max, no trucks. So it was quite a different experience being on a ferry that was kind of cruise ship. The passenger was kind of like a cruise ship, and it carried tractor trailers as well as my little heavy van. On the right here is a Parks on the Air activation. Pennsylvania Avenue is one of the parks of the National Park Service, believe it or not, the area around Pennsylvania Avenue. And here I am at the very end of Pennsylvania Avenue, which forms the congressional members and staff's parking lot. You can see the Capitol in the background. What I'm trying to do here on an early Sunday morning is blend in with the guys in these commercial trucks and trying not to get noticed or kicked out, because I really didn't belong there. But I had a successful activation there, and got out of there before I could be challenged by any law enforcement. Now, normally, before I get off this slide, normally many of my presentations talk about this van in great detail. I spend a lot of time and continue to spend a lot of time improving its capabilities, and a lot of people are interested because it's kind of a unique vehicle. Not many hams have this kind of vehicle for roving around. So it's funny doing a presentation that doesn't involve the van, but I'm doing this one focusing on pedestrian portable operations. If you want more information about this TV van, though, you can just go to my QRZ page, and there's pictures and descriptions and PDFs of PowerPoints, more information you'd ever want about that van if you're interested. So let's start focusing on park programs in general. I already mentioned National Parks on the Air and Canadian National Parks on the Air. Worldwide Flora and Fauna was an already established program centered in Europe that the United States started getting involved with as a KFF, but it split from WWFF as an independent program, and because of lack of support from the European-centered WWFF program. So I'm involved with Parks on the Air. I do submit logs to WWFF still, but there's a lot more people in the U.S. and now in Canada involved with Parks on the Air. A couple pieces of terminology, if you're not already familiar. The term activator means operating from a park. So that's the main attraction to me, is activating from parks and being an activator for Parks on the Air as well as the other parks programs. Chasers are mostly at home, and they contact activators. So you got chasers and you got have activators. Activators can also contact each other, and that's kind of an exciting thing when you can contact one activator to another, and we call that a park-to-park contact. And when someone screams "park to park" in a pileup, they get all the attention from the other activator, because it's kind of fun to do that. And zeroing down on Parks on the Air, I could easily talk for an hour about this program, and maybe you guys already had a program on that. I don't know. But this is an independent program. It's not associated with the ARRL or any other existing ham organization. It's self-funding from contributions. It started in the United States and then Canada, and now it's expanding internationally. And I don't know all the countries involved, but we seem to add a new country every couple months or so. Indonesia, Japan, England, and Dominican Republic, and quite a few more I don't remember. It's not a small program. So far, since 2017, there's been more than 1.7 million QSOs so far. And we just recently, I think just this week, passed 7,000 members of the Facebook group that forms the social media arm of Parks on the Air. I must say, this first happened during the ARRL Parks on the Air program in 2016, and it's a fun new development in ham radio, in my opinion, to combine ham activities on the air with social media, discussing people's activations, putting pictures up of people's operations in parks. I think it really enhances the fun of the overall program. But You do not have to be a member of that Facebook group or participate in Facebook at all in order to participate in Parks on the Air. It's just an optional thing, and Dimitri himself can tell you, because as far as I know, he is not on Facebook at all, and certainly not in the Parks on the Air group. That's okay. He's still a valuable chaser, and I always love hearing from Dimitri on the air. And here's 3 links if you get a soft copy of this. So the main one is parksontheair.com. The Facebook group link is here. You could also search for Parks on the Air on the Facebook search if you wish. And we also have several Slack channels that you can get to from here. And the attraction of Slack is that it's more organized as far as the discussion groups goes. Facebook does its own thing, has algorithms for sequencing discussions, but on Slack, it's meant to be a text back and forth. So it's a more organized place to get discussions and spots. And I should also add, and this would be my last general comment about Parks on the Air, we have our own spotting program. So you don't have to spot yourself on the DX cluster necessarily. You can, but most chasers that are looking for activators will go to the Parks on the Air site and look for spots on our own website. And it's a great way to sit down and say, hey, who's activating now? And there's hardly ever a time, maybe in the middle of the night or early in the morning, but other than that, there's always somebody out there on the air. And by the way, if you just want to chase, if you're not interested in activating, go out and contact Parks. You don't have to submit a log. You don't have to register. All you have to do is contact one of us in a park, and we'll appreciate every contact you give us. Next section of the presentation, I'm going to talk about the pedestrian portable stations I've built. First, an introduction to urban park activations, and then I'll talk about the 2 stations I built originally for National Parks on the Air and continue to use them in the general Parks on the Air program. First, this might be confusing for, excuse me. A small source of confusion is the name park. We use it as a generic term for a site operated by a park service. Now, most people, most of the time, including me, think of a park as a bucolic area with grass and trees, and that's fine. And most parks are indeed like that. But it also includes sites, especially in the National Park Service, that are commemorating historic events or are monuments and so forth that may be as small as a single building with no grass and no trees. So park is just a generic name for those sites that are a part of the Parks on the Air program. The vast majority of activations, you just drive into a parking lot, and I'm sure everyone here has gone to a state park or maybe even a national park and just driven in and parked and enjoyed the park. When you're there as a ham, you can just operate from your car. Some people set up substantial antennas from their cars. Some go to a picnic table. Others even hike in a distance into the park and set up a portable operation. However you want to do it is fine for Parks on the Air. But my main point here is that most activations start by parking in a parking lot. And that's easy to imagine for most parks. However, most urban, especially National Park Service parks, have to be walked in. There's no place to park and activate. Parks on the Air rules are strict about few things. You don't even have to have a required contact on the air as long as you exchange some piece of information. But one thing we are strict about is being on park property, which in the vast majority of cases, no big deal. It's really obvious and it doesn't present a challenge. In some cases, especially for urban parks, it can be quite a physical challenge. Sometimes it's even a challenge to find out what's part of the property and what's not. So that's one of the challenges of doing urban park activations. Some other challenges include the transport itself. I mean, going to the center of Manhattan is never easy, even on the weekends. You always have little room to operate. You have a high profile with all those people around. You're not going to be able to stealthily get away with your operation. Some areas are sensitive for cultural reasons, and some are restricted either because they're because they take a lot of visitors, or maybe because they're an attractive target for terrorists. So there's a lot of physical challenges to doing urban parks. And then there's the challenges of the station itself, the RF challenge. You're always going to get high RF noise in an urban environment, and oftentimes you also have high audio noise, right? Buses going by are probably the worst offenders, cars and loud talking and whatnot, all the loud sounds of the city. you're always going to be using a small compromising antenna, so you're not going to have much of a signal, and you don't have much metal up there in the air to gather the signals from people trying to contact you. And lastly, of course, you're also close to buildings, which makes all these other factors that much more difficult. Now I'm going to talk about the two stations I built for national parks on the air. The first one, called the Nerd Wagon, and this name was given when I first posted some pictures of what I was doing, and a chaser, and actually it was a chaser actually won national parks on the air, gave it this name, and I stuck with it. So I built this station for 2 Philadelphia parks that, even though I said before, some urban parks are difficult in this regard, 2 Philly parks had a significant amount of lawn spaces set up. And that includes Independence Hall, which everybody has heard of, and also Edgar Allan Poe, where he lived in Philadelphia. It was a National Historic Site. However, both required Park Service permits, and the Park Service, generally speaking, everywhere doesn't allow penetration of the ground or wires in the trees. You have to leave everything as you found it. So part of my design, I wanted to be loud, because with all this, with all the difficulty of getting a permit and the planning, I might only have 1 activation each. So I wanted to make sure I was loud. And I also wanted to build within a 20-foot circle. And of course, I couldn't use any vehicles. I ended up with a hamstick dipole antenna, about 18 feet high, and using a ballon. And my station was basically this very same station I used inside the minivan when I activated parks or was in contest. And that included my first ever radio, ICOM 7100, with a 500 watt amp and powered by a battery, a 90 amp hour battery. That's a deep cycle activated glass mat battery. Wrote an article, if you want more information, I wrote an article in QST in June of 2017. So here's some pictures. This is when we're starting to set up the system. Here is the 18-foot mast with the guy ropes. This guy here, I mentioned somebody started with SDR and got me involved with ham radio. This is W2HYW, Rob, and he helped me set up, although he didn't operate that day. And you can see these bags here holding down the tripod and holding down the guy ropes, again, avoiding the penetration of the ground that was disallowed. And way back here, the Independence Mall, that includes Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell, is 3 blocks of mostly grassy areas. And back here, you can see Independence Hall itself. In my garage, this is the station packed away, and here's the tripod and the mast that make up that the antenna system. And here I am about to put the system in the back of the minivan. I bought a set of folding ramps, and I can just push this station into the back, and then fold up the ramp and transport the ramp as well to take it back out of the car in the city. Back here, you can see some components. Here's a battery. It's hard to see, but here's a battery that's inside a trolling motor battery case. That includes, it's nice that it protects the battery, protects the terminals, and also has a, I think it was a 60 amp circuit breaker. So it's nice. It's always, not just nice, it's kind of a requirement to have current protection right near a battery that can create, these car type batteries, of course, can give you 1,000 amps or more if you short circuit them. So protection at the battery is a must. Here's a voltage booster that's unfortunately no longer available, but this kept the voltage up at 14 volts as the battery got tired. And here's some of the wired connections. This is the 500 watt amplifier, and the radio itself is kind of obscured, but I also had here is a 600 watt automatic transmatch from LDG. So that's helpful, because while you can get ham sticks to resonate, of course, usually that particular frequency is not available for operating. So the transmatch allows me to move away from the resonant part of the ham sticks to operate in different parts of the band that are unoccupied. And here's what the wagon looks like inside the minivan. In this case, I was bringing it down to Washington, D.C., and I have the wires from the minivan's own batteries and the ground system connected. That way I could use the station inside in the wagon, in the minivan, to make contacts from the minivan before I took the wagon out. kind of a, oops, excuse me. Oh, one kind of interesting story was that when I brought this down to Washington, D.C., I stayed in a hotel a mile or two south of the Pentagon and parked in the hotel's garage. And, any civilian looking at this, it looks kind of scary, right? Kind of hate to use the B word, but it kind of looks like a bomb, at least the ones that are always depicted in movies, right? So when I woke up the next day, there was a guy at the end of my hallway in the hotel with his door propped open, and he wasn't trying to make eye contact with me, but I said hi to him and thought, well, that's really weird, because especially if you're in a city, the last thing you want is have your door open in a hotel, right? That's kind of squirrely, but okay. Then I went to the garage to take the minivan out. The same guy walked to a car on the same floor of the garage. He then followed me south down the road, and then followed me when I made a U-turn to go north past the Pentagon. So I think that was a case of somebody seeing something and saying something, as the cliche goes. But I'll never know for sure. But it would be a heck of a coincidence I had that behavior and him not monitoring me, making sure I wasn't doing something nefarious. On the other hand, kind of glad, because yeah, it looks kind of squirrely there. That looks kind of suspicious. Another use is that at the Edgar Allan Poe house in Philadelphia, as I mentioned, that was one of the two places I designed this for. This was a cold, rainy day, but again, it took months to plan this and to get the National Park Service permits. So we were smart to bring a large plastic coverings to cover the radio equipment and the operator. And in this case, this is one of my buddies, Walt KB3 SBC, who's operating, and we had a third guy with us as well. So this was an exciting time. This is the first time this site had been activated, and we got, of course, a lot of contacts around the country. The last place we used this wasn't a design, but happily, the wagon was able to fit in an elevator to operate from the Franklin Institute roof. And the Franklin Institute is one of the oldest science museums in the country, big classical building. And personally, my kids and I spent an awful lot of time in the Franklin Institute having fun in their science displays. But anyway, it was helpful even to get it up in an elevator. And kind of funny, we were operating here in front of this roof, and the roof actually opens up. It slides this way to reveal telescopes, because it's an observatory, and the thing moved while we were operating. I have no idea why they would have to move the roof in the middle of the day, and it created a lot of RF noise. But on the other hand, it was kind of fun, because you don't usually see a big roof like that move 3 feet away from you. So that was an interesting part. And we had a different team join me of 3 different folks, including a young lady who was called the Cookie Queen of National Parks on the Air, Emily. And it was a thrill to have her come down, because they don't get into the city too much. So that was a fun day with another group of active activators and National Parks on the Air. Excuse me, I've got a sore throat, so I got to take some water breaks. That's one station. Now, this second station I call the Stooper Station, and I also wrote this up in QST in 2017, in this case in the May issue. I wanted to activate all the parks in the eastern part of Pennsylvania, and I did end up activating all of them throughout Pennsylvania in the end. But one of the ones I knew was going to be the most trouble was this location here, the Thaddeus Kosciuszko National Monument in Philadelphia, and it consists of this house only. No lawn, no sidewalks that are part of the Park Service, just the house. So I had to aim at building a station that I could operate from this stoop. You can see what a small area this is. Not many stations are able to operate from a stoop like that. So as I mentioned, the strictness about rules for either National Parks on the Air or the current Parks on the Air program, you can't just operate in front. You can't just park here. You can't even set up on the sidewalk in front, because this is not part of the property. These stoops are the only part of the property I could see that I could operate from. And as a side effect, I figured, hey, if I can build a station that can activate that tiny little scoop, I can also activate any other urban park that's available. And clever or not, I call this the Stooper station for obvious reasons. The heaviest part of the station is built into a backpack. So I wanted a full 100 watts, and I wanted to operate for hours. Again, using the IC 7100 radio, ICOM 7100, and that includes a separate control head, and being able to separate that control head is a huge help when you're in a compromised location where you don't have much room. 4 components are in a rack in that backpack, a 20 amp hour, which probably is overkill, but a 20 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery from the vendor Bioenno, and I can strongly recommend Bioenno for a lithium battery for portable use. Everybody in parks, well, I can't say everybody, vast majority of people who use portable lithiums use Bioenno batteries. So go there if you're interested in this subject. I also use a voltage booster to keep a steady 14 volts. The ICOMs, including the 7100, are known for being really sensitive to voltage droops. So I kept at a steady 14 volts. That's probably not necessary for most radios. That might not have even been necessary in this case, but I didn't want to have to worry about it. So I got a steady 14 volts out of that lithium battery. The main part of the ICOM radio, and then finally a automatic trans match that made for ICOM radios. So all you have to do is mash a button on the control head for the trans match to run. As I mentioned earlier, for these ham stick dipoles, again, they can be made resonant on a very narrow band set of frequencies. But if you want to move off of that, like if someone's already occupying that nice resonant frequency, then you're going to want to have a trans match so your radio is happy. Here's that mini rack with the 4 components I mentioned. The radio main unit itself, the trans match is here. It's harder to see down here. It's the lithium battery, and then mounted vertically here is the voltage booster. This rack that many people ask me about, unfortunately, it was sold on eBay for several years, but I can't find it anymore. But if you want to build a small rack like this, what I would do personally, I would first look into the vendors that supply the amateur robotics community. They seem to have components like this, not necessarily built for radios, of course, but components like this that let you build the metal framework around which you can build a mini rack like this. Excuse me for another water break here. So I wanted to use I was using 2 antennas at first. I thought the smallest antenna I could think of for that stoop would be a magnetic loop. This one had only a 15 watt maximum because it uses an air gap variable capacitor. I mean, usually you want higher, you'd like to have a higher tolerance for voltages, and if you have a serious mag loop antenna, you'd probably have a vacuum based capacitor, but this was an air gap, so that's why the 15 watts maximum. Did have a small footprint, and very portable, and specifically aiming for the Thaddeus house. However, since that initial activation, most of my activations use a ham stick dipole before. Same ham stick dipole as the Nerd Wagon I showed you earlier. However, it's mounted on a shorter, more portable tripod, and that one is about 10 feet off the air. It also features the ability to have a horizontal and vertical configuration. Of course, a horizontal configuration is usually preferred, but the vertical is nice to have when you're in an especially tight spot. And then I also have a case for the ham stick pairs. So here's what the 2 components look like when I'm walking around Manhattan or Washington or Philadelphia. I've got this relatively heavy backpack. I never weighed it. I'm guessing it's 35, 40 pounds. So kind of heavy, but not ridiculously heavy. And then the antenna and tripod is in this longer case carried by hand. Inside the backpack, this is the frame I showed you, the main unit, but there's a lot of other components that go along. So here's the control head for the ICOM radio, and the connection that looks like an Ethernet cable, but it's definitely not an Ethernet cable. Over here is the headset and foot switch that I prefer to use, and also a push-to-talk microphone as a spare in case one of these components goes bad, and they do every so often, so it's nice to have a backup. Here's the coax to go between the radio and the antenna. And here are the small connections needed to go between the transmatch and the radio, as well as the adapter for connecting the foot switch and headset. And these last two wires aren't used very often, but I keep them with the backpack station for special purposes. This is a connection to get the PTT output of the radio in case I want to connect an amplifier, or pretty unusual, my VHF club has a 6-band microwave QRP box, one box with 6 microwave bands, and so I use the ICOM 7100 that has 2-meter capability as the IF to go into the transverters for the microwaves. And what I do is drive to club members' driveways and do short distance QRP microwave contact. And this PTT wire fires off the microwave transverters when I transmit. And lastly, this is my own special design for a short distance antenna. It consists of a PL250, whatever it is, UHF type of connector, and soldered on about a 4-foot piece of wire. So I'm tongue-in-cheek saying it's my own design, but what it is just allows me to make short distance contacts, either for those VHF contests, or this is my 6-meter antenna, or what's kind of fun is I can show up with this backpack radio when someone else is activating a park, be in the same park, 20, 100 feet away, and I can make contacts from 160 meters to 70 centimeters using this little wire. And the key, of course, is turning down the power. So with 5 watts out, the radio doesn't care about the amount of power that's being reflected back on all those bands, even though this wire is not resonant anywhere. And so that's fun. I can make 10-band contacts with activators using this antenna. And lastly, maybe the most important thing of all is a pad of paper, because I almost never, sometimes I do, but almost never take a computer with me on these portable activations. I log on paper. So there's one less thing to go wrong, one less thing to fiddle with. Excuse me again, man, this sore throat is not fun. And here's a breakout of the case of the antennas and tripods. So here's the ham sticks and the screw-in whips for the ham sticks, the tripod, which has a connector on top for making a dipole. So all this is a ham stick that connects to the shield on one side and connects to the center conductor on the other side. And I also have a 1-to-2, not 2-to-1, but a 1-to-2 ball in here that's connected, and that kind of reduces the RF coming back, as well as balancing out the signals in a less than ideal antenna. So I have some kind of balance in the dipole. And lastly, I have a couple of bungee cords, which are useful if I'm setting up at a table or a bench or something. I can get some more stability by tying the tripod to the bench or table. So I was successful with this system. Here's a picture of the Thaddeus Kosciuszko activation during national parks on the air, and showing how everything is on the property, the antenna, the radio, and then the operator also has to be. So I didn't have a selfie stick. This was as good a picture as I could make, but I wanted to prove that I was legit, that I was on the property. And what you see here around my neck is a kind of a portable table that you wear, and so it's supported around around my neck. And here's my pad, and down here on the lower right is the radio's control head. Here's a few pictures. I also went down to Washington, D.C. to activate all the parks, many sites around the National Mall. I meant to look up how many there are, but there's more than 10. There might be 12 or 14 different sites that are near or on the National Mall, and 3 of those are here: the World War II Memorial, Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, and many more that I walked around. Since I've gained weight and gained a few years, I'm not sure I could do this today. So I'm really glad I did that when I could, because that was a nice adventure on the down to Washington, D.C. On that same trip, Oh, I should say, let me go back. So I should say all these daytime outdoor locations, I was pretty worried about someone, um, a ranger or a law enforcement, asked me what I was doing or even telling me I couldn't do it. And I was pleasantly surprised that nobody hassled me here. However, excuse me, these next two locations, I did get permission beforehand because it was at night and a lot more visible. Um, President Obama made this park in 2016 during the period of national parks on the air a national park site. This is the Women's Equality National Monument, and if I were to turn around from this picture location, across the street is the Supreme Court. So very sensitive location. The Capitol Police are always hanging out there for obvious reasons. So I had to be a good ambassador to talk to the policemen, to tell them what I was doing, and to show that I had permission. And then here, one of the most difficult, probably the most difficult location in Washington, D.C. is Ford's Theater. Part of Ford's Theater is across the street at Pedersen House, not sure which. This is the so-called the house where Lincoln died, where he was taken after being shot at Ford Theater. So this is also a part of the National Park Service site. And I activated from this top of these stairs. And on 20 meters, even though the building was between me and the West Coast, I actually made quite a few contacts all the way out to Oregon and California, even though the building was in blocking it that way. So RF can do some amazing things that you just wouldn't expect with a 100-watt hamstick dipole. I can get completely across the country through this building, in effect. Now I switched to 40 meters. After about 10 minutes of operating, the alarms went off inside the building and strobe lights were flashing, and I was pretty sure that I was the one causing that by operating on 40 meters there. You know, I triggered some kind of device, and I was scared because all I could picture in my head from that moment on is fire trucks converging from all over to save this historic building. But luckily, the security guard from across the street came over and took a look and silenced the alarm. Of course, my own activation was done at that point, and I was packing up. But that was a scary moment. It's funny, one of those things that's funny in retrospect, but terrifying in the time. And the Stupor Station isn't just for urban activations. I don't do a lot of activations out in the wild, but this was a special case because it's a confluence of 3 different parks that I could get credit for. You know, one contact can count for 3 different parks. But this is the intersection of the Appalachian Trail and the Potomac Trail. And that intersection is inside the C&O Canal Park. So there's a 3-for-1. This backpack is heavy enough, and I'm heavy enough, so I wouldn't want to walk too far, but walking in 300 yards or so isn't too bad even for me. So this doesn't necessarily have to be used just for urban activations. Now, the last section of my presentation, I want to concentrate on New York City. Now, I realize your club has a national reach in teaching CW from what I could discern on your website, but I assume that a lot of your members come from New York and maybe around the New York City area. So I'm doing a pitch here for you guys to be a popular activator in New York City. So there's a number of difficult locations in New York City, but you guys are local experts and you would know best how to get to these parks. The easiest POTA park in New York City is the Gateway National Recreation Area. It's a multi-site park with parking lots in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. So that's really easy to wet your beak, if you will, on parks on the air. But anyone can drive in and activate that one. In fact, I do it every year during the New York QSO party. I set up it in parking lots in the Gateway National Recreation Area so I can be in the contest and be in parks on the air at the same time. But what I'm pitching to you guys is whether you want to have a challenge and if you want to be a hero for activating a rare park inside the city. and show that the city doesn't scare you like it does. And I mean that literally. There's so many people who are scared of big cities, and it's a demonstration of that you're comfortable being in a city and doing something unusual in the city, and demonstrating that New York City is a good place to visit. So to that end, I took a capture of the Parks on the Air map, an interactive map that's available, so you can locate parks wherever you are in the country. That's available on the parksontheair.com site. And what I did was list out all the POTA parks that are in Manhattan Borough. The Riverbank State Park is the only state park I know of that's actually in Manhattan, and the rest of these locations are part of the National Park Service. What I'm going to do in the rest of this presentation is go through each of these, starting with Hamilton, because I've never been to Riverbank, starting with Hamilton Grange, and work my way from north to south along the island to show you these locations, almost all of which I've activated myself, and to show you it can be done, and to give you an idea of what these locations look like if you wanted to try it yourself. So starting at Hamilton Grange, I got special permission. I don't know if it's special, but I got special permission at Hamilton Grange to park the minivan while I was in while I was in the New York QSO party in October of 2016. And I just about made it fully on the property in this one little parking space. However, there's plenty of lawn area. There's a hill down here that's not captured in this picture. Plenty of area to operate pedestrian portable. I know one gentleman activated it 2 or 3 times using a wire antenna. So this is quite doable on Manhattan if you wanted to do it pedestrian portable, but you could also do it with the vehicle if you can plan and get permission to do it. Before that day, before Hamilton, and before before the New York QSO party started, I did a pedestrian portable activation at General Grant National Memorial, otherwise known as Grant's Tomb. And here as well, there's a pretty large lawn area that makes it easy to set up for any pedestrian portable operation. Lots of trees. That's not good for RF, but physically anyway, it's pretty easy to set up here to activate General Grant. Next in Midtown is the Teddy Roosevelt Birthplace National Memorial. National Monument. And I was lucky that this location was being renovated. So that meant there weren't rangers around, there wasn't visitors there. So I had less chance of having a problem with other people being at this location. What I found was that there's blocks on either side of these stairs, and that makes for a nice flat area to set up the tripod for my antenna. So I set the antenna here and sat at the rest of this filthy block to make the contacts. And it's hard to see in this picture because of the background, but I put the hamstick dipole in a vertical configuration to save space. One thing about this location, though, I hope someone else will activate it, but it is extremely RF noisy, just about the noisiest place I've ever been RF-wise. However, you guys are CW operators, so you have a big advantage over somebody like me that can only do a sideband. And obviously, those weak signals trying to get through the noise can be more easily heard by a CW operator. Next, this is another park, Stonewall National Monument. Was added also by President Obama in 2016 during National Parks on the Air. And after it was accepted into the program, I wanted to plan a trip up here. I believe this is Stonewall itself here in the background. The most open area of this the Stonewall National Monument is Christopher Park, a little triangular park. And I set up in one of the few paved areas here, and again use a vertical configuration for the dipole, and I sat on the ground to make contacts. Now here there was a very heavy police presence all around here, and I didn't make a connection until later that it was only 2 weeks after a attack on a gay dance club. I think it was in Florida. Anyway, I forget the name of it, but that tragedy probably created the incentive for the police to guard this area heavily in case someone wanted to make another similar attack at this very famous location for gay rights. So while I was sitting here, a heavily geared up policeman with the military style rifle and the helmet and all that came walking through, and that's not something I expect at an activation. So I glanced up at him and he glanced up at me, and he didn't say anything. He didn't stop, but I guess he was satisfied I was harmless, and he kept moving on to the other side of the park. So at least I felt well protected there. But yeah, that's something I don't expect. I wish I had a camera going at that time, because not something you expect to see. The African burial ground is down near the beginning of the financial section, and actually near the near a center of a lot of buildings owned by the federal government. I did not activate this location. I did scope it out and take a picture. As you can see physically, there's areas that that would make it relatively easy to set up. However, for obvious reasons, it's an extremely culturally sensitive site, so I certainly wouldn't want to do it without getting permission beforehand. It had been activated in national parks on the air by a gentleman who had a personal connection with somebody on the staff there. So I hope one of you come down and activate this park, because it hasn't been activated since then, and it would take some work and planning, and maybe going on, I forget if they're closed either Saturday or Sundays, I forget which, but probably going at a time when it's closed and getting permission from the Park Service to do so. The next park south in Manhattan is Federal Hall, and I don't know if you've ever been there, but Federal Hall is pretty much across the street from the New York Stock Exchange. So here I'm again on a vertical configuration. I had taken the radio rack out because it was a hot day, so I wanted to let it get as much air as possible. And you can see this is the view. This is another view of the tripod and mast, and across you can see the stock market. Now this area is already filling up with people, even though this was about 8:30 in the morning on a Sunday. So definitely you want to be here as early as possible on a Sunday. It's probably the least crowded it'll ever be, but even if it's the least crowded, it still gets crowded. This was another case where I was happily surprised that I didn't get any pushback from a ranger or other law enforcement. I did see a National Park Service employee walk by, and she kind of glanced up, and I waved and smiled to her, and she half-heartedly waved back and continued on her way. So I thought, well, I guess I'm in the clear. Another case of people in the city properly evaluating the threats around them, which is not always the case when you're in state parks. Some state parks, law enforcement thinks the antennas are scary for some reason, but and give me some grief. But here in the city, it was not a problem. So I'm kind of amused by that. I did a second activation of Federal Hall Christmas Eve of the same year. Mitch Stern, W1SJ, who lives in Vermont but has a lot of ties to New York, activated some of these same Manhattan locations himself during national parks on the air, and he invited me to activate on Christmas Eve. Now, unlike me with my little hamstick dipole, Mitch uses a full-size 40-meter dipole. I'll have a decent amount of audaciousness, right? I can't call myself fearless, but I do go to places I don't belong. But man, the guts to put up a full-size 40-meter antenna, I really admire that. And obviously, it was easier to put it up with two people than with one. So here's the support for that wired dipole that's tied to the statue of General Washington, and here's the backside where you can see the tripod and the tie-offs more clearly. And here's Mitch operating on the ground. I have to say that this is my lithium battery that I brought because he ran out of power the last time. He was concerned about that. So this is a short video of him operating that I'm used by. I don't know how well this will work over Zoom, but let's take a look. It's not very steady. I'm usually better at that than this, but it's kind of fun to watch Mitch jump between his keys and his keyboard to log the log the contacts, and it's really tough to go back and forth like that while you're sitting in an awkward location. But that was Mitch, and he's a heck of an operator. Next location, Castle Clinton on the southern tip of Manhattan inside of Battery Park. This is a circular fortification, and there's plenty of room to operate. I operated here because it was close to the ferry to go to Governor's Island, which was my actual target. Here on Governor's Island, there's a lot of open grassy places, and I set up here, and it was I had great results, a great pile up on 20 meters, but it wasn't very breezy. But a rogue wind came before I could save the tripod. It got knocked over, which normally not a big deal, right? Something might get bent, but not a big deal. But it actually broke one of the collars in the mast. So sadly, I had an early end to my activation here on Governor's Island and learned an expensive lesson in trying to support these, especially when they're in an open area like that, subject to wind. And lastly, the very last activation of the year in New York was at the Statue of Liberty, the first real activation in Parks on the Air, and this was the last unactivated unit of National Parks on the Air on the East Coast when I activated it. Here, these two pictures, you can see I kind of learned a lesson about the wind from Governor's Island. I have some water bags here for weight, and I also put that bungee cord around this sign in order to keep the antenna steady. And that was important there because there was quite a bit of wind, as you might expect in an island in the middle of the New York Harbor. So that is my presentation, and again, one more pitch. I hope you guys consider getting into Parks on the Air, and especially I hope you consider going to those difficult parks either in Manhattan or other places in New York City.